They say water remembers. It remembers every stone that shaped its path, every hand that guided its flow. So when they destroyed my great-grandfather's dam, 80 years of limestone, sweat, and history, it was as if the water itself went feral. I came home from my daughter's wedding to find the creek raging wild, the air thick with diesel fumes, and the proud old dam reduced to mud and rubble. And standing there sipping champagne like she'd conquered something was Cordelia Blackthorne, the HOA president who decided our family legacy didn't fit her picture-perfect neighborhood. She thought she'd erased us in one afternoon. What she didn't know is that I'm a retired Army Corps engineer, and I know exactly how to make water follow orders again. My name's Ezekiel Ironwood, Zeke, to anyone who's earned the right to skip formalities. I inherited 15 acres in Missouri that my grandfather Jeremiah carved out of wilderness back when men built with calloused hands and unshakable resolve. In 1943 he laid every stone of that dam himself. Cut limestone fitted so perfectly it didn't need mortar. It wasn't just flood control, it was a promise. Every spring I could hear the gentle trickle of water over those stones, smell wild mint growing along the banks, and feel the smooth touch of rock polished by generations of steady current. That dam wasn't just holding back water, it was holding our family's history in place. For decades, the Ironwood farmhouse sat quiet beside that creek. Life was simple. Even after my tours overseas, after the medals and the medical retirement, peace was what I came home for. My daughter, Autumn, grew up here chasing bullfrogs and building memories where sunlight cut through oak trees like stained glass. We were content, until the developers came. They called it Willowbrook Estates, a shiny new subdivision that bloomed like weeds around our land in the mid-90s. Cookie-cutter homes for people who thought rustic charm came from a furniture catalog. My creek became their water feature. My flood control dam became their eyesore, and then came her, Cordelia Blackthorne, a California transplant with a Tesla that never saw a speck of dirt and a smile that could slice granite. She was the kind of woman who said community values while calculating property resale in the same breath. 3 months after she became HOA president, she knocked on my porch like she owned the place. Jeans probably worth more than my monthly disability check, and said, "We need to discuss your property's integration with community standards." Integration, like I was some software glitch that needed patching. I told her plainly, "Ma'am, this property was here before your community existed." She looked around like my land was a stubborn virus in her perfect system. Then came the paperwork, liability concerns, safety hazards, unapproved infrastructure, code words for, "You don't belong here." Her perfume couldn't mask the stench of control. I tried to be civil, offered to let them inspect the dam, maybe do maintenance checks. But she had that predator's gleam, the kind you see in people who've already decided you're the obstacle in their way. Within weeks, she'd filed an anonymous report to Child Services claiming my property was unsafe for visiting kids. It was a surgical strike timed perfectly during Autumn's wedding planning. The social worker took one look around and apologized for wasting my time, but by then I knew this wasn't about safety. This was a war. A month later, the real attack came in the mail. $12,000 in unpaid infrastructure fees for a dam built before their subdivision even existed. I stood there, staring at the letter, diesel fumes still fresh from the morning mail truck, and realized what I was dealing with. The fee notice bore the name Brantley Blackthorne, Cordelia's husband, masquerading as a licensed hydrology consultant. My military brain started connecting dots. The HOA was calling my dam a hazard not because it was unsafe but because it was inconvenient. They thought I'd fold. But I've built bridges under artillery fire. I don't break easy. It took one background check to find the first crack in their foundation. Brantley wasn't licensed to practice in Missouri, a fake expert, issuing fake assessments. So I filed complaints, requested financial transparency at the next HOA meeting, and dropped every legal term I knew in front of 60 confused residents. The room went silent when I showed proof that their consultant wasn't even certified in the state. That's when Cordelia's perfect little empire started leaking. Her emails got sharper, her smiles tighter. She called secret meetings and sent angry notices about outsiders interfering with community management. But the neighbors had begun to whisper. And if there's one thing water and truth have in common, it's that they always find a way through the cracks. Because Cordelia had just made her first mistake. She underestimated what happens when you push a man who understands the flow of pressure too far. The morning after that HOA meeting, the world felt different. The October air had a sharp bite, the kind that carried both warning and promise. My old boots crunched on the gravel as I walked to the mailbox, and there it was, a fresh certified envelope, thicker than usual, dressed in the same smug legal font that Cordelia loved to weaponize. Inside was the next escalation, a letter from a law firm called Petton & Associates, claiming my dam presented catastrophic liability exposure to the neighborhood. They demanded I purchase liability insurance immediately, or faced forced removal of the structure. I could almost hear her behind those words, sipping wine as she imagined me sweating over the cost. But I wasn't sweating, I was smiling. Because desperation always smells the same, it reeks of panic under a coat of perfume. While Cordelia was blanketing me in legal threats, I was building something far more dangerous than a dam. I was building a case. My old Army Corps habits kicked in. Documentation, verification, counter-strategy. Every letter was copied, time-stamped, catalogued. Every visit from her inspectors was recorded on trail cameras hidden among the oak trees. And when the county office received her anonymous safety complaints, I requested the reports through public records. It didn't take long to notice that the language in those documents matched her own HOA memos almost word for word. Meanwhile, the subdivision itself was beginning to crack. Longtime residents who remembered me as the quiet engineer down by the creek were suddenly showing up at my porch with questions. Dalton Greystone, a retired history teacher with a spine of steel, brought his own notice for emergency assessments. "Zeke," he said, holding that paper like it was a death certificate, "she's making us pay legal fees to sue you. When did we ever vote for that?" Then came Savannah Riverside, a widow living off her late husband's pension. She clutched her letter with trembling fingers. "I can't even afford my medication some months," she whispered, "and she's charging us for ... What, exactly?" That's when I knew the tide had turned. What had started as a personal feud was becoming a neighborhood revolt. I began hosting late-night meetings in my kitchen, coffee brewing. Papers spread across the same oak table my grandfather once used to sketch dam blueprints. We weren't just residents anymore. We were a task force. Dalton brought records from old HOA budgets. Savannah managed spreadsheets like a forensic accountant, and I walked them through the laws Cordelia had violated without realizing it. Her HOA never had legal authority over properties established before incorporation. She'd been running the show like a queen, ruling over land that wasn't even hers. By the end of that week, we had a plan. I reached out to Marlo Chen, an environmental attorney known for her obsession with water rights and her hatred for HOA corruption. The moment she read the letter, she said, "This isn't a civil issue, it's a criminal goldmine." Together we filed complaints for bylaw violations, requested financial disclosures, and pulled every county permit Cordelia had ever used. The deeper we dug, the darker it got. Her emergency assessments had funded personal legal battles, landscaping projects billed to non-existent companies, and consultant payments routed to suspicious accounts. But Cordelia wasn't backing down, she was doubling down. When she realized residents were starting to question her, she retaliated with another round of intimidation. Anonymous posts appeared on neighborhood forums, warning about a dangerous veteran with unstable infrastructure. Someone even sent letters to my daughter's workplace, accusing me of being a threat to public safety. It was textbook smear tactics. And then came the final insult. A 48-hour emergency demolition order taped to my gate scheduled for the same weekend as Autumn's wedding. The claim, sudden dam instability requiring immediate removal for public safety. I didn't need a degree to recognize the scam. The dates didn't match. The inspection report was fabricated, and the permit was 6 months expired. It was an ambush timed to devastate me when I was most distracted, but Cordelia had made one fatal miscalculation. She assumed engineers only built structures. We also built contingencies. The morning of Autumn's wedding dawned clear and golden. Dew shimmered on the grass. The creek whispered softly over the stones that had survived storms for generations. I was buttoning my dress uniform when the first diesel engine roared outside. Through the window I saw excavators lining up like executioners. By the time I stepped onto the porch, Cordelia was already there, clipboard in hand, boots spotless, voice dripping false authority. "Emergency safety order," she called out, waving papers like holy scripture. "Your structure poses imminent danger to the community." The contractors looked uneasy. Even they could tell this was wrong. I asked to see her permit. One glance and I felt heat crawl up my neck that the signature was forged, the seal outdated. "Folks," I said loudly, turning toward the growing crowd of wedding guests gathering by the fence, "you might want to film this. The HOA president is about to commit destruction of private property without a valid order." The cameras came out, phones clicked, and just like that, her arrogance was immortal. The excavator's claw sank into the limestone with a screech that felt like betrayal itself. The creek exploded through the breach, roaring wild for the first time in 80 years. Mud and water swallowed everything: soil, stones, and a century of family history. Autumn's wedding had to move to the church basement, her white dress hem-stained brown by the flood Cordelia unleashed. But those stains became evidence. Evidence that would haunt Cordelia far longer than my dam ever could. Because when you destroy something sacred out of greed, you don't just unleash water. You unleash consequences. And as the flood carried her lies downstream, I knew this wasn't over. This was only the point where pressure met the first crack in the dam. The next morning, the smell of diesel still clung to the damp air. My grandfather's dam lay in ruins, but among the scattered stones, something far more valuable surfaced: truth. As the creek settled, I noticed papers tangled in the reeds along the banks, soggy HOA invoices, bank statements, and checks half washed in mud. Fate, it seemed, had decided to hand me evidence gift-trapped in the mess Cordelia herself created. I spread the documents across my kitchen table to dry. The ink had bled, but the numbers were clear enough. The HOA account balance was negative $847,000. Buried within were invoices to Blackthorn Landscaping Solutions, a company that, as I soon confirmed, didn't exist anywhere outside of Cordelia's imagination and her bank account. $200,000 billed for beautification projects that had never been done. Fake maintenance, fake consulting. Real money. It wasn't a safety crusade, it was a cover-up. I called Marlo Chen, and she came over within the hour, her sharp eyes scanning the spread like a crime scene. Zeke, she said, this isn't mismanagement. This is federal. Wire fraud, insurance fraud, money laundering, the whole deck. The realization hit like thunder rolling over the hills. Cordelia hadn't just destroyed my family's dam, she'd nearly sunk her own community to hide years of embezzlement. We brought in reinforcements. Judge Clarence Whitfield retired, but not retired enough to ignore injustice, reviewed the evidence with the steady calm of a man who'd seen countless liars self-destruct in courtrooms, and Father Benedict, our local priest and former military chaplain, offered moral clarity sharper than any sermon. Son, evil has a way of flooding its own foundations. That night, our kitchen turned into a war room. Dalton, Savannah, and Preston, a former HOA board member who'd quit in disgust, all gathered around the table. Coffee cups surrounded piles of documents, our voices low but resolute. Every signature, every date, every payment trail became part of a map leading straight to Cordelia's corruption. The evidence was so overwhelming, it practically confessed on its own. Meanwhile, Cordelia was unraveling. The pressure of her collapsing empire drove her to wild moves, secret meetings, late-night emails, panicked financial transfers. She even tried to hire a private investigator to dig up dirt on me and the others. The universe must have a sense of humor, because her investigator turned out to be Agent Roland Grimm of the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. Cordelia had literally paid a federal agent to collect evidence against herself. By then, the investigation was moving faster than her panic could compensate for. My property became the secure evidence site. Files copied, indexed, stored in safes under federal chain of custody procedures. Every check she wrote, every forged permit, every fake invoice traced to her name. The more she tried to hide, the deeper she buried herself. And then, the spiral became spectacle. She broke into my property one night. Trail cameras caught her stumbling in the dark, tripping over my garden hose, muttering curses. She filed false reports, claiming I was a violent veteran with PTSD and unstable tendencies. She posted smear campaigns online accusing residents of joining a militia group. It was absurd, and every word became part of the evidence file now being prepared by federal prosecutors. But her final mistake, that one belonged in a movie. Cordelia called me one morning, her voice shaking with fake politeness. Mr. Ironwood, she said, I think we can reach an understanding. She wanted to meet at Murphy's Coffee on Main Street. I went, not because I trusted her, but because Agent Grimm told me to. I carried a small recording device in my jacket pocket. She arrived wearing her usual expensive smile, sliding an envelope across the table. $500,000, she whispered. For those documents. We can make this all disappear. The sound of her voice, calm, confident, rehearsed, was like music to every federal agent waiting in unmarked cars outside. She'd just bribed a witness in an ongoing federal investigation. The recording caught every word. 2 weeks later, Cordelia tried to stage one last act of control. Flyers appeared all over Willowbrook, branding me as a domestic extremist and warning neighbors about militant veterans plotting against community leadership. She even organized an emergency safety meeting at the flooded community center to rally support. She didn't know that half the people attending were undercover federal agents. That evening, the hall smelled of mildew and fear. Cordelia stood on stage, PowerPoint behind her, painting herself as the hero saving the neighborhood from chaos. Her voice dripped with practiced authority as she declared, I personally authorized the removal of that dangerous dam because community safety must come before sentimental nostalgia. You could have heard a pin drop. 200 people in that room, cameras rolling, a federal judge, a priest, and me sitting in the front row. I stood up. Thank you for admitting that on record, I said. Now how about the $847,000 you stole through fake companies, and the insurance fraud you used to cover it? Her face went pale. Lies, she shouted. Remove him, he's dangerous. But her security team had already realized what was happening because several of them were wearing FBI badges under their jackets. Agent Grimm stepped forward. Mrs. Cordelia Blackthorn, he said, his voice echoing through the stunned silence. You're under arrest for wire fraud, mail fraud, insurance fraud, conspiracy, and embezzlement. The click of handcuffs sounded like a gavel striking stone. Applause broke out, spontaneous, raw, and louder than the creek outside. Cordelia screamed about conspiracies, about being framed by militant extremists, but no one was listening anymore. The neighbors she'd stolen from were crying, clapping, filming. Justice had finally come home to Willowbrook Estates. Within months, the HOA was dissolved. Federal restitution recovered more than $2 million, enough to rebuild the community and fund new projects. I received compensation for the dam's destruction, but I didn't spend it on revenge. Instead, I rebuilt it, not alone this time, but with neighbors who showed up with gloves, shovels, and determination. We used the original limestone where we could, combining it with new designs that improved flood control and created walking trails along the banks. Autumn and her husband moved into the renovated farmhouse that spring. The sound of their children laughing beside the restored creek felt like the world healing itself. We founded the Ironwood Veterans Foundation, using part of Cordelia's restitution to support soldiers facing bureaucratic injustice. And every year, our town holds a festival by the dam, live music, food trucks, and a sign that reads, "Transparency builds stronger foundations." Cordelia, she pled guilty, 5 years in federal prison, all assets seized. They say she cried when they read the restitution order aloud. I almost felt sorry for her. Sometimes I stand by the new dam at sunset and listen to the steady hum of water flowing over stone. It doesn't rage anymore. It doesn't fight. It just moves forward, patient and sure, carving its own course through the land. That's what justice does, because water always wins. And this time, I made sure it flowed exactly where it belonged.